Welcome to another episode of the Your Longevity Blueprint podcast. Today, my guest is Dr. Austin Lake, who is a functional medicine provider, health educator, and founder of Holy Health, a transformative health program that helps individuals restore energy, balance hormones, and reclaim health using holistic, evidence-based strategies. He holds a doctorate in physiotherapy, a bachelor's degree in exercise physiology, and board certification in functional medicine. He's guided thousands of clients through challenges like chronic fatigue, weight struggles, autoimmune disorders, thyroid imbalances, and metabolic dysfunction, addressing the true root causes rather than masking symptoms with pharmaceuticals or medical procedures. His passion for holistic health was born out of personal experience, watching his brother battle leukemia, his father suffer multiple heart attacks, and his mother live with autoimmune disease. These trials forged a mission to uncover why people get sick and how to truly heal. Grounded in biblical principles, Dr. Lake's approach integrates faith, science, and natural healing. He empowers individuals to break free from the cycle of prescription dependency and to steward their health with intention. With a following of 1.5 million across social media platforms, his work reaches a global audience with practical insights, myth-busting education, and faith-driven encouragement. While not working with clients or educating online, Dr. Lake enjoys time with his wife Carly and their 4 children, where they live a simple, natural life centered around faith, family, and wellness. He's also a passionate advocate for homeschooling and equipping the next generation for healthy, purpose-filled lives. His mission is simple: to help people reclaim their health, their vitality, and their God-given potential, one life at a time. Love that. We could end the show right there. No, just kidding.
Yeah, wow. I don't know who put that together. My team must put that together. That's quite the intro there.
Welcome to
I
the
would
show,
never say
Doctor.
that self about myself, but I'll
It's
go
always
with
so
it.
awkward when someone reads your bio and it's like,
Oh,
you
it's the
have to
worst.
sit there
Yeah,
as you.
it's just like okay, yeah, I sound like a big cocky person, but yeah. Anyway,
Well, you have 4 kids. I think, well, so I had a baby. I guess I have a 15-month-old. So I know you have a young one too. How young
yeah,
is your
he's
youngest? Yeah.
he's going to be a year old in like 2 weeks. So we
So
have
yeah,
eight, 6, 4, and almost one. So yeah, boy, girl, girl, boy.
yeah, handful, family full. That's
Yeah,
great.
yeah,
Well,
it's
tell us
fun.
your tell us your story. How did you get into functional medicine?
Oh man, it's I always tell people when this is kind of an interesting story. I always wanted to do like sports performance, like with my doctorate being in physiotherapy or physical therapy, depending where you are in the world. You would never guess that I would get into what I'm doing now, where I'm working with women and their hormonal issues and doing it from this natural approach. So I'm not a physician, so I don't prescribe medications.
Yeah.
And so it honestly was, at the time I was kind of like annoyed with it. I was like, well, now I want to get down this road of like helping people with their hormones and women's health, but I can't prescribe medications. And it actually was a blessing in disguise because it forced me to get really creative with helping my clients. And it
Yeah.
forced me to kind of go back to school and get further education in functional medicine. So I did another 3 years of getting a certification in that. And that was well worth the time and the investment because it really helped to pull all these things together that I learned just in my general doctorate training of just like how the human body works and kind of put all the pieces together from a functional medicine perspective. And so with that, I kind of took that information, that knowledge, and started applying it specifically to women because I just had so many women clients that were coming to me with, they weren't seeing results with their physician, or they weren't seeing results with whatever they were doing, and so they didn't want more pills, they didn't want more levothyroxine or SSRIs or whatever else they were getting. They wanted to actually feel better, and they just felt like they were losing their grip on what they were experiencing. And so I felt like it kind of forced me into this corner where I was just like, you know what, if they're not getting the help, and I keep saying like somebody's got to help them, I just decided, why not me? Like, why can't I be the one to start to help them solve these problems? And so that's kind of how it all started from
So it
a
kind of fell in your lap. Yeah.
yeah, an education standpoint. But what was interesting is, I think in hindsight, God always makes things pretty clear, as far as like how he works, sometimes while it's happening or before it happens. But for me, it's usually been after it's happened. And so at the time, it didn't make a lot of sense. But looking back on the last, 10 years or so, I started to see that, oh, well, like I know why I got into this stuff. Like my personal life was very much kind of setting me up for this. Like all the things that you described in this intro, that bio about me was true about like what my brother went through, with what my mom went through, my dad went through. So I was just around a lot of chronic disease and different varieties for a long time. And really that was the only thing I knew about how life worked. Like all I knew was that like this is one way that it can happen, and it's very horrible and nobody should have to go through this,
Mm.
and it's difficult for people to walk through with one person, especially, but especially with a family when you start seeing those kind of issues. And so it really motivated me just to help people not go through that. And if they are going through it, how to start getting out of it. And so that was kind of the motivation for everything.
Sure. So can I ask a personal question? So were you
Yeah.
raised in a very like health conscious, nutritious family or not? Were you raised maybe I don't want to say with a flip side approach, but
Yeah. I mean,
a
so
standard American diet? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think what drove a lot of our issues was not a lack of desire or like a lack, not like there was some ignorance. There's always ignorance involved, with health. But I think just looking back, it was always a state of survival. Like we
Mhm.
always had these things that were just like pressuring us to like be done, or like brother has cancer, like
Yeah,
everything
yeah,
changes, like
yeah, yeah.
now all of a sudden my dad has to work two jobs, to pay for the bills. And then mom has so much stress from having to go through that. And then dad gets a heart attack because he's working 80, 90-hour weeks. And then mom starts having more stress and doesn't sleep. And then she starts doing more convenience things. And, next thing you know, it's just like there's a whole cascade of things that happen.
Yeah,
And so
sure.
even though like we would eat real butter, we wouldn't eat margarine. Like we would try to eat or drink whole milk versus skim milk. Like we would do those kind of things. Mom would try to cook food at home as much as she
Yeah,
could,
yeah,
but
yeah.
it's just a lot of stress and things like that. So it's kind of a combination, but it wasn't what you'd expect. It was just a ton of stress for a long time.
Yep, and stress is our biggest hormone hijacker. I always talk about
Yep.
that, and maybe we'll come back to stress
Yeah,
at
absolutely.
at the end. But I like that you're seeing the silver lining, that you're seeing through all my family struggles, God essentially led me to functional medicine, and now you're able to help, the masses. So I see that
Yeah.
you see the silver lining in your struggle.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
you do have a big social media following, and there was I don't want to say, I don't even know how to describe it. I don't want to say serious or funny or interesting video
Yeah.
regarding some Girl Scout cookies. So can you tell us a little bit about that, and then all my listeners can go watch it. But
Yeah. I
tell
mean,
me
if they
how
can
that
still
came
find
about.
it. Yeah. I actually, there was one mom that was in that video. She requested that I take it down. She actually threatened me to have the police show up at my house to take it
Oh
down.
my
And
gosh.
it was I don't even know why. I mean, their faces were blurred out, so I don't even know what she was saying. But I took it down just to be respectful towards them, and
Yeah.
I didn't think I did anything wrong. But she was pretty threatening, and I was just like, I don't have the time to deal with
Yeah,
this, and so
yeah,
I
yeah.
just kind of took it down. But
Yeah,
anyway,
yeah.
so what happened was it was just there was a lot of controversy stuff going on with Girl Scouts of America and just the ingredients of their cookies and the heavy metals and these different research studies that were coming out. And so I was like everybody else, just reading it and just knew like these cookies are not
Not
like
healthy.
they're
Yeah.
not good. Yeah, they're not healthy, especially for kids. Like, and I don't think kids should be promoting this stuff for the profit of Girl Scouts of America. And so I uh I was just walking one day. I was outside of Walmart and I saw Girl Scouts selling cookies, and I happened to have my little microphone in my pocket. I don't know why I never have it in my pocket, and so I put it on my shirt, and then I just asked some lady that was standing there like, "Hey, could you hold my phone and record this real quick?" And I just like walked up and offered to buy all the cookies from them. And I didn't know how much they had. I just was
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
I'm just gonna see what they would sell them all for. And my thought was, number one, this will be a great video to demonstrate that, hey, we shouldn't be selling, like the whole point is trying to draw attention that these cookies are garbage and people shouldn't be buying them and selling them.
Mm-hmm.
And so the statement I was trying to make is that like, hey, this will be a good video. I'll buy all these cookies. And I know it's not going to solve every single problem, which is what people are accusing of. Like, what do you think this is actually going to solve? I'm like, look, it's a video to try to get attention on this topic. And so
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I was doing that for that purpose, and I was going to buy all the cookies. It was like $300, $400 worth of cookies, and so I was like, I'll buy them and just throw them away. And so I told him like, and my statement in the video was like, I'd like to buy these so I can throw them away. And they didn't like that. And they're like, well, why would you throw them away? And people like these. And I was like, well, I know, but they're not good for these people. So at least I can, quote unquote, protect them from these cookies. And so it led to this big thing. And the moms ended up not wanting me. They wouldn't sell me the cookies. Like they refused to sell them to me. And so that kind of stirred up this whole thing online. And people said I was harassing the young girls. I never even talked to the young
Oh,
girls. Like I only talked to the moms, and it was just this big thing. But a lot of people were in favor of what I was doing. It was just
hmm.
the occasional people here and there. So
I'm surprised the
anyway,
mom
that
didn't just take your money and say, I'll
I
take
know the
it.
girls were actually like, yeah, like let's do this. And
Yeah, yeah.
but they anyway, that was kind of the deal with that.
But you know what? That planted a seed because now that mom has to have a conversation with those girls on why did this guy want to buy all our cookies? Why does he not want people eating those cookies? So now those
Right.
girls are going to know, ooh, these may not be the healthiest thing for us to be eating and selling. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, and same
yeah,
same thing with it went viral pretty. It got to like 2 million views within like a day and a half, and it
yeah.
was it was going viral pretty quickly. And probably going to be one of my bigger videos I've ever had. But it just I don't know, with the lady in the video, I just like
Wasn't worth it. Yeah,
I live in the same town as them. Like I don't
yeah,
want to be creating any kind of drama that's unnecessary.
yeah.
So if it was, I don't know, that's the reason I pulled it down. But I
Sure. Got
probably
to be
should have left it up. Yeah.
have to be the bigger person sometimes. Yeah. Okay. So you've also
Yeah.
been banned on TikTok. So what happened there?
Yeah, man. Yeah, I sound like a horrible person right now.
No, no, no.
No,
People
no,
are
I know what you're
censored
saying.
for, I don't want to say for good reason because What I mean by good
Yeah.
reason is because they're preaching the truth. So tell us what you were preaching that you got
Yeah,
censored.
TikTok's interesting because TikTok kind of turned, they after all that stuff happened with the legislation 6 months ago or whatever, TikTok has definitely turned for the worse and they're way more censoring than they used to be. And so I was just talking about mammograms and the risk of radiation and
Yeah, yeah.
how I think there's an overemphasis on mammograms for routine screenings when there's other alternative options that
Hmm.
don't put you at risk for direct radiation over your sensitive tissue. And then said some things about biopsies that I felt like, biopsies is the same kind of thing and create unnecessary scares. And there's alternative ways of scanning this stuff. And before we get
And
to that point where we
80%
have to
of the
do,
biopsies are negative. This is
right.
great because this episode is going to follow. I just did a episode on
Okay.
QT scanning.
Yeah.
The
Perfect.
QT.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this was, yeah, perfect to follow that. But yeah, continue.
Yeah. And so I was just mentioning that. And so I was talking about that in a podcast. It got clipped out of that podcast and put up on TikTok. And so it was just something that they banned me right away. Like there was no warnings. It was just like I was done. And so I could probably appeal my account and maybe get it back, but I haven't tried since then. So I lost like
Wow.
90,000 followers, something
Wow.
like that. But it's fine. Like I kind of just leave all that stuff up to God and just trust that like
Yeah, yeah.
it'll work out. But yeah, that was kind of the main reason for the TikTok ban.
It's so sad because it is good information, but censorship is real, people. Okay.
It's very real.
Ah, okay. So entertainment aside, let's talk about women's reproductive health and birth control education. So I was going
Mhm.
to ask kind of what drew you into focus on that, but you kind of already explained that. So maybe we'll just move to the next question. So let's talk about the history of birth control in general, and feel free to share your feelings regarding its use.
Yeah, I mean, I think what got me looking into it was number one, I had just so many clients that had been on it or were
Mm-hmm.
currently on it. And so I
Mm-hmm.
was just like, we know there's the common deficiencies or retention of copper or like deficiencies of B6 and disruption to
Mm-hmm.
methylation and your detox pathways and obviously messing with your cycle. And I think whenever you're stopping an important phase of your cycle, like ovulation, or you're interrupting it,
Mm-hmm.
there's a consequence to that. And I think a lot of women, whether there's a it's just hard because I understand there's multiple uses for birth control. Like number one is to stop a pregnancy, right? Like you're
Mm-hmm.
trying to prevent a
Mm-hmm.
pregnancy. But a lot of women, a lot of younger women, especially, like they're given it to help with their menstrual cycles as a way
Or
of
their
like
acne,
treatment.
or their, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, or acne or whatever. And so I think that's where I saw a lot of my clients, and I've had a few thousand women that I've worked with. And so like you start seeing these common threads where it's like
Mm-hmm.
I was on birth control in high school, and then it continued into college, and then my early adulthood, and then I was perimenopausal, and I started having symptoms again. So they put me back on birth control at 45 years old, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, like if this is our only intervention we have to help
Sure.
women with acne or irregular cycles or endometriosis or whatever, then it's like
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where I just started to look into it. And so I started to look into the history of birth control and just trying to get a good grasp as to how we got to where we are. And what I found was kind of shocking. It really stemmed from the eugenics movement back in the early 1900s with Margaret Sanger, I think is her name.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of stemmed from this, honestly, like people don't like this word, but like the Nazis and kind of what they were doing with this like pure society. And they didn't want really the advancement of other ethnicities except
Sure.
for white people. And so they were trying to like control population. They were trying to make sure it was a pure society, all that stuff. And so Margaret Sanger kind of stemmed from that. And then birth control kind of stemmed from her and this other doctor. I can't remember his name. I probably could find it if I have. I think it's Dr. John Rock and John Rock and Gregory Pincus or something like that. But anyway, like they were kind of like the clinicians that were creating it, I believe. And then Margaret Sanger was kind of like the activist personality with the whole group. And that really was feeding into the feminist movement that was taking place in the 60s and 70s with the whole idea that, hey, you know, you don't need to be staying at home. You need to like be out there in the workforce. Like you have equal rights, like, go out and work. But the problem is a lot of these women were still, having babies. And so they wanted to stop, you know, fertility, right? Like they want to prevent, give women an option so they could go out and work. And so birth control really spiked at that time. And again, people hear that and they think I'm like against women's rights. And it's just like I'm not again, like I think if
Your whole
women want to work,
practice exists to help women. Yeah.
yeah, right. I have two daughters, I have a
Yeah,
wife, like I
yeah,
have a
yeah.
mother, like I have a lot of women in my life that I love, and I'm so thankful that they are free to do what they want. Like I'm a red-blooded Christian American. Like I think freedom is the best thing ever. And so it's not necessarily about the rights aspect of the feminist movement, I think that is a good thing. It's more about the shift in the encouragement to not have kids, to put more stress on your shoulders. But what happens is, for and this is just a biblical perspective, but as a man, my default is to be passive. Like that's kind of like the sin of Adam that I still have, right? And men typically have is we want to be passive and we want to default. We want to give up our leadership role to somebody else. And I think women, because of the encouragement, because of maybe the sin of Eve, if you look back at that, like there's this tendency to want to take on leadership that maybe is not yours or take on roles that aren't yours. And so I think we are created to have
Yeah,
a
guilty as
balance of these.
charged. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Like we're created to have these this balance of roles that we take on so that we don't get overwhelmed and we don't create health problems and we don't create, other issues. And so with women, it's like, hey, now you have a passive male at home who's not being an effective leader, and you have a woman who's being told that she needs to get out and do more than she probably should. And so you're working, you're taking on a financial leadership role. You're also still probably managing the household, still probably managing the kids. And you wonder why. You mentioned cortisol and like how it robs your hormones. Like you wonder why, progesterone goes down and estrogen goes up and testosterone converts into these unfavorable androgens, because you're trying to become more like a man. Like when you get into these states of survival, your body is not broken. It's not dumb. It's actually going to prioritize a little bit more testosterone and less ability to procreate, because that's going to get in the way of your survival. Right. But if you're trying to survive, having symptoms of PCOS and having like more male characteristics is actually probably not a good thing, but it makes some sense why that would happen. And I think people don't really think about that when it comes to your
No.
hormones, especially women. But it's
Yeah.
usually because you're taking on more than you could probably handle, and we all have a limit to the stuff.
Mhm. So let's go back to what you initially said with birth control. So, and maybe the dangers of that. So, birth
Yeah.
control so I hear you say, okay, I see kind of, why women were kind of given this control as far as the ability to, control their cycles and not have more babies, whatnot, which may actually not be a good thing. But
Mm,
what can happen with long-term use of birth control is high copper, low B6, you said methylation issues. Let's break those down a little bit. So, and I see this all the time on patients. Like when we test copper levels, we can see them high from a copper IUD or from birth control, and usually getting them
right.
off birth control, copper will go down.
Right.
But tell me kind of what are dangers of high copper and low B6?
Well, so
Yeah, yeah.
so I mentioned before with B6 specifically, folate is another one. So
Hmm.
what I was referring to is methylation, which is a
Hmm.
process that's happening, a few hundred billion times a second. Like if we don't methylate,
Constant,
we die.
ongoing. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So you have a lot of women that, number one, they're taking something like birth control where it's depleting folate, and then they're eating stuff that's full of folic acid, which is synthetic. And then if they have MTHFR, which is the genetic variation that happens to about 60% of the female population,
Mhm.
now all of a sudden you don't do any of those things well. Like you're not methylating well by default genetically. And so then you add some like folic acid that you have to detox out of your system. And if you
And
don't
birth
methylate,
control. Yeah, yeah.
and the birth control, right?
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
if you don't have B6 and then now you're low in folate and you're getting pumped full of folic acid, it's a recipe for disaster for a woman's day to day. Not even just like different stages of your cycle, but just day to day. And so I always, people always talk about like, well, like women go crazy or they get like these huge mood swings different times of the month, and it's like, well, yeah, like there's literally no hormonal stability throughout the course of their month, especially if they're eating a standard American diet, especially if they have all the stress on their shoulders, especially if they're on birth control. Like it's a recipe for disaster, and it's no wonder that women will feel crazy at times, because like on the inside, it literally is going crazy. Like their body is trying to just keep up and keep them alive, but it's a big task. And so that's kind of what I'm referring to with the methylation and the B vitamins. But then, because of the high copper and zinc will compete for absorption. So if
Mhm,
you have high copper, zinc will go down.
mhm.
And so zinc deficiency is another big one that women will start to notice. And that's where your immune system can become more susceptible to, viruses and pathologies and illnesses, because you can't really fight and prevent that viral replication from happening. And so zinc goes down, but also can or can affect some hormonal conversions in terms of testosterone and progesterone and things like that. And so you start to see just this whole cascade of events start to happen simply just from birth control. But then there's, like you mentioned too, just not having a regular cycle, missing out on a third of your cycle with ovulation, which is honestly, even though there's some things that come along with it, it's probably the best time of the month for a woman, to where like you feel like you can have a higher intensity with exercise. Your libido goes up. You have maybe a little bit more energy, And
During
you're
you're saying for the listeners with ovulation. So if you're taking
with
birth control
ovulation.
to suppress ovulation, that is a problem. Yeah.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Thanks for clarifying that.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So you're taking away one of the most beneficial time periods of your
Mhm.
cycle, just so that you don't get pregnant. And it's like, or so you can control acne, which doesn't really help anyway. And so I think, to me, it just seems crazy that we encourage this. But not only that, it can disrupt your gut microbiome. It can deplete things like selenium, which is super helpful for your thyroid, vitamin C, again, for your immune system. So there's a lot of consequences to taking it routinely. And it's just, I don't know, it really is an epidemic, I think, of birth control use. And I don't know how to get it to stop except for having these kind of conversations.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely drawing awareness to it right now. So how would you define informed consent? Do you think all of this is discussed when a provider is prescribing birth control to their patient in the 20s or in their 40s or 50s, whatnot? How can
Yeah,
we do better? Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I don't know. It's interesting
That's a
because
loaded question, I think.
yeah, I think it's hard because I'm trying to think about, okay, like the time frame that somebody like a clinician would have to provide all those details. And number
Hmm.
one, the even the knowledge to know fully what I just
Hmm.
explained to you to be able to communicate that effectively so that a patient can actually make an informed decision. I don't think either one of those aspects are there to
Yeah.
fully allow for informed consent to occur. A lot of the times, if a patient goes into it with a prior knowledge or they did some research beforehand, and then they can ask maybe some more pointed questions. Like for me, for example, just with my dad, he was in the hospital, and I don't tell anybody like what I do or who I am. I just like to kind of have an honest conversation with them. And so I was talking to the cardiologist, and I was challenging him on a couple medications that he was recommending, and he immediately got so defensive, and he's like, well, apparently you know more than me, so you just do what you want. And it was just like this tone and attitude. I'm just
Uh, why
like I'm
can't
just
we
trying to have
just have a
I just want to
conversation?
have
Yeah.
a
Yeah. Yeah.
conversation. Like, I just want to like figure out what's
Yeah.
best for him. But like,
Yeah.
well, this is standard protocol. This is what we do. This is what the research says. And it's just like, that's what most people get. And
Yeah.
I know how to defend myself and advocate for
Yeah.
my father, but a
But
lot of
most
people
people don't. Yeah.
don't know
Yeah.
what to do. And so like, I thankfully had a plan in place, but it just, even for me, it felt like, oh, like this is so frustrating, and we didn't have the time to discuss it. So I don't know what the right answer is for that. I really
Hmm.
think people have to be doing their own research before they even get there. So they have a game plan of, if the doctor says this, then I'm going to consider it, but also ask about X, Y, and Z,
Hmm.
and I think you have to be your own advocate going into this stuff.
Or an alternative approach would be, okay, so the birth controls never really get into the root cause of the problem as far as heavy bleeding or acne or whatnot. Anyways, so
Yeah.
just knowing there's an alternative, be that functional medicine, right? So maybe we'll go that direction for
Yeah.
a second here.
Yeah.
So for patients who come to you who maybe have chosen not to take birth control, how do you approach some of those concerns, be them heavy cycles, the mood changes, the acne, whatnot? How can we do better as far as educating patients that there are other
Yeah.
treatment options? Yeah.
So first, it's going to come down to like why are they taking it? If it is just for those symptoms you mentioned, then it's much easier for me, because then I can just say, like, let's look at your gut, let's look at insulin resistance, let's look at estrogen dominance, let's look at if your progesterone is low, let's make sure environmental toxins like parasites and plastics and xenoestrogens are all being
Hmm.
accounted for. Let's evaluate your sleep and your stress, your circadian rhythm. And if you start to, and again, that sounds like a lot for somebody who's listening to all that, but really what that means is, like, what do you put into your body, like what food, what products, what air, what water, like what is coming into your system. And then the other important thing to think about that's super simple is just what's coming out of your system. So you got to get good things in and bad things out to complete the circle of life. And most people, again, that's a super simplistic way of looking at it, but that is honestly the truth of what keeps us around and keeps us
Hmm.
thriving.
Hmm.
So when you're eating good food, you got to be able to break it down, absorb it into your bloodstream, and then assimilate it into your cell. There's several things that go into that, right? So it's like you got to have strong sufficient stomach acid. You got to have good digestive enzymes. You have to have a nervous system that is relatively regulated to where you can be in a parasympathetic state, so you can actually rest and digest your food. And the other thing is you got to be able to get these nutrients into your blood, and making sure that you don't have things like a leaky gut condition, or where you're having the enhanced intestinal permeability. I know you're aware of all these things, but
Yeah,
just for your
yeah,
audience, like,
yeah, yeah.
so things aren't getting into your bloodstream that aren't supposed to be there, and you're only bringing things in that are supposed to get into your system, so you're not creating an excess of inflammation. That's what we're trying to get focused on. So we got to heal the gut. We got to make sure you're eating the right things at the right time of day. So I always tell my clients, you got to eat with the sun. If you're eating late into the night, or you're eating in a dysregulated circadian rhythm state, your insulin's not going to be as sensitive as it could be. And so when you're eating things and you're taking in energy, that energy is supposed to be converted and absorbed and then used as ATP, which is what our mitochondria use to produce, or that's what they actually produce as energy. If you don't do that, then like you're taking energy in, you're storing it likely as fat, and that's where insulin becomes more resistant to the ongoing message of sugar's coming in, energy's coming in, and we're not knowing what to do with it. And you start seeing this like buildup of external body fat, and you're like, oh my gosh, like I can't seem to lose weight. But the reality is you have an energy conversion problem. Most of my clients, because they have insulin resistance, and for a lot of them, it's because they have an inflammatory problem, whether it's because they don't detox or they're eating a lot of inflammatory foods, or they're just, there's chronically deficient in vitamin D and, folate and B6 and all these things I was talking about before that makes it so they don't detox well. And so we really just try to get good things in the system and get the bad stuff out through detoxification. But I don't want to sound complicated, but it's really for my clients, we try to make it as simple as possible by saying, hey, like eat these foods at this time of day, make sure you're taking these foundational supplements, and then we kind of evaluate how well they're detoxing. We focus on their detox pathways to ensure that they can go through all 4 phases of detoxification. Then we make sure that they are sufficiently hydrated, that they're breathing clean air, that they're focusing. Once we kind of progress into their detox, they're detoxing parasites, heavy metals, environmental toxins, radiation, potentially mold. And we kind of walk through all those different facets of their health. And while we're doing that, we're trying to create a long-term plan that they feel like they can sustain. So it's a little bit different for every client, obviously, but that's kind of the focus that I
That's
have when we're
functional
walking through
medicine
this.
in a nutshell. Exactly.
Yeah,
That's what we
yeah,
want to do
it's
for all patients, including the
right,
patients who have issues for which they're being prescribed birth control
right.
pills. Yeah. So
Yeah,
you
so
said
it's
that very
like,
well. Yeah.
yeah, like you can't. I always tell people the good news in all this stuff is that you're not that special, and that means that like thankfully there are core things about the human body that we know to be true, and like we can't skip over those things. Like we have to do those foundational things first, and then the more uniqueness of the client starts to kind of rise to the top because we're like, okay, like we know that these have been accounted for. Now let's see like what's going on here through heavy metals. Let's make sure like we've got these fully detoxed and so on and so forth. So there's like a combination of you got to do the foundational things. You can't skip that, but you also have to account for this person as an individual and make sure it actually is a plan that they can implement, because that's where a lot of people struggle.
Sure. I want to go back to estrogen dominance. We've talked about that a lot on the show, but do you have any tips specifically for, like you mentioned, the xenoestrogens? I think you mentioned plastics too, but any tips you want to mention just to help get those out of our lives?
Yeah. Well, first step is just you don't want to be consuming them. So I think whenever you have, like candles or fragrances or beauty products or, obviously birth control or deficiencies, like you can have, I mean, if you had a healthy intake of or limiting those things I just mentioned, you're still going to be producing estrogen that you still have to detox
Sure.
from,
Yep.
right? And
Yep.
so, for example, like if you have a high level of, I think it's zerolone mold. I can't remember what it's called, but
Zearalenone, however you pronounce that. Yeah.
that's the one. Yeah. If you,
Zearalenone.
yeah,
Yeah.
so like if you
Yeah.
have that, like you're going to mimic estrogen. It's going to be really like you're going to have a lot of these weak estrogenic effects. And so if you haven't detoxed or you haven't got rid of that and got that out of your system and out of your environment, like it's just going to be an ongoing problem with your estrogen. But for women who are, trying to just avoid like plastics or, their cosmetics or household items or their foods, the dirty dozen, soys, things like that. That's where you kind of have to start. And those are the things I kind of mentioned in my ebook, is just kind of like what the things to be paying attention to, so you're not bringing them in more than you should. And then when it comes to supporting your detoxification, you want to make sure you methylate well, and you want to make sure that you sulfate and you have this process of glucuronidation to where you can actually get this stuff out. And so things like calcium D, uh,
Glucarate.
glucarate. Yeah, I always struggle with that one too. Those are some helpful things you can do, but you got to figure out like what is the actual problem. So for some women, their estrogen levels might be normal on like a Dutch test, but then you look at their inability to detox, and then you start seeing like, oh, it's actually a detoxification, not a detoxification problem, not a conversion problem of making too much estrogen. It's just
Yeah.
that they're
Not a
not getting
hormone
rid of them.
level problem. It's a, yep. Yeah. Yep.
Right. So there's things like that you kind of have to be careful with, because you don't want to be giving those supplements to anyone, because it can actually make their estrogen levels too low. So there's just things like that you got to be mindful of. But I think for most people, like you got to make sure your gut health is good, because bile synthesis is super helpful at kind of helping to clear these estrogens as well. Because if you don't do it, they can often be reabsorbed back through, and they get stored in your fat cells. And so once you start to exercise, you lose weight, you release these toxins out of your fat cells. So you can start to have a recirculation problem if you don't have proper bowel movements or bile flow. And so your gut health is super important with that.
Yep.
But then also just making sure that, your progesterone is in the right ratio with your estrogen. So like if your estrogen is pretty good, and that's, maybe you're not detoxing well as you could, but then you have low progesterone because you're too stressed and have too high of cortisol. Then it's like you're just going to have extra problems on top of it, that it's not necessarily just a estrogen problem.
Yeah, yep. Then you really are estrogen dominant compared to your progesterone. You mentioned a lot of good things there, so I want to go back. I want to put in a good plug for mold.
Yeah.
Because yes, certain mold, just to be clear for the audience, there are certain mold toxins that can drive hormones low. So sometimes, which I actually previously, I think it was a few episodes ago, had a guest on who was in premature ovarian failure due to mycotoxins. We detoxed her and
Mm,
her hormones kicked back in. So certain mold toxins can suppress hormone function while
yeah,
others
that's
can, yes,
good.
cause estrogen dominance. So mold can cause you to swing either way. Also, just wanted to share, I was going to share this at our staff meeting earlier today, but I forgot. So I'll share it now in the podcast. I had a patient, middle-aged, who should not have estrogen in the 4 or 500s. She did.
Mm,
And really, I shouldn't say all we did, because we did help her lose weight, which helped lower her estrogen. But we put her on calcium D-glucarate. She took 2 a day. She just came back
hmm.
this week and her estrogen was down to like 50, which for her age was much more reasonable.
Yeah,
So
right.
she had a tremendous, reduction, great results. I think she also did the liver detox. I think she did liver detox, lost some weight, and did the calcium D-glucarate. So I was really happy to see that.
Yeah,
But to your point, calcium D-glucarate is stronger than even DIM. So if you have low estrogen, you don't want to be taking either of those, or taking DIM
right,
will induce hot flashes and night sweats and cause you to feel
right.
low estrogen. So
Hmm.
some patients who are estrogen dominant earlier in life who need those things later in life no longer need those things.
Right,
They need
right.
estrogen support. We don't need to lower estrogen. So, yes, all the more reason to take these supplements under the advice of a provider.
Hmm.
Um, okay, so we were talking about sources of xenoestrogens and plastics. What about plastics? I mean, maybe that's just straightforward, like don't consume anything out of plastic. But do you have any tips for?
Yeah, I mean, I just heard today that, I think the average human brain weight, like 5% of it is from microplastics. Like that's how much plastics we have in our actual brain tissue now. Is about
Wow.
5% of our brain weight. And so they're everywhere, like they're in babies, they're in older adults. It's one of those things. I think there's some nuance with it. I think, and I'm not an expert on this at all. And so like I
Yeah.
usually say like we got to avoid plastics and like, use glass containers and things like that if you can. But then even if you look at the recent study that came out about glass bottles that had higher levels of microplastics than water bottles, people are like, well, how is that? It's like, well, it's just because of the lid like shearing back and forth and releasing microplastics into the water. And so I think there's like things like that can make you feel crazy about all
Yeah.
this stuff. And it's like, how am I ever going to get out of this place alive? Well, newsflash, you won't. Like something's going to get us at some point. But the whole point is that being intentional with whatever you can and just trying to do your best. I think the biggest thing for me is that you don't want to be drinking water out of a plastic bottle. Like that to me is a big no-no. Like if you get like Dasani or whatever kind of water brand and it's been sitting in a storage facility, getting exposed to UV light, and then it's in a, hot environment, a cold environment, like that's where those microplastics
Yeah.
can really become more of a problem in your water. But then at your home is like the biggest thing. Like if you don't filter your water at home, that's like a bigger concern to me than like an occasional plastic water bottle. Just because like that's the bathing water, that's the drinking water, that's what you're
Hmm.
cooking with, and that's where it becomes, I think, more of a toxic issue for people on a chronic basis. And so atrazine and fluoride and chlorine and all these microplastics and whatever chemicals we have, who knows what else is in the water, but drinking tap water or even water from a filter from your refrigerator, or a Brita filter, which they're all under a class action lawsuit right now because they don't do what they say they're doing. So those to me are like the biggest things of get
Hmm.
like an RO system if you can. Make sure you're adding minerals back to your water.
Yep.
If you can get a whole house water filtration system, just to for your bathing water, because chlorine can absorb through the skin, can be inhaled through the lungs. Fluoride can't; it's only absorbed through drinking it. And so if you're sitting in a hot shower, you got to be careful with that because all that hot vaporized mist can
Hmm.
get absorbed through your skin, and that's where
Hmm.
a lot of chlorine can disrupt your thyroid and things like that and reduce
Yep.
iodine. And so that's what, like the things I focus on more than the microplastics. But
Yeah. Yeah.
again, such a hard thing with the micro because they're everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with all your tips for the water. That's what we do. We've talked about that a lot on the show. I want to come back to some other tips. You said you were kind of talking about like detoxing the body, right, and eating clean. Talked about regulating your nervous system and some foundational supplements. So I do want to talk about both of those buckets. So what are
Mm.
some tips for regulating your nervous system? You mentioned obviously it sounds like your family has had lots of chronic stress. How did you learn to help regulate your nervous system? What have been some tips that you've incorporated?
Man, I think what's always interesting to me about the simplicity of life. I think, even just the name of God, Yahweh, like to me, it
Yeah.
feels like you're taking a breath. And like he is our breath, like he's the air in our lungs, like, and he,
Yeah.
he like sustains life and he is all things. Right. And so I always tell my clients, especially before they're eating, like one of the lifelong hacks that we've always had is like praying before a meal. Because like what happens when you pray before a meal? Like typically you're taking a moment to like close your
Hmm.
eyes, maybe you're taking some deep breaths, and you're showing gratitude for a lot of things, but for your food and all that. And so I think a lot of people, when they start having poor eating hygiene, they're in a hurry all the time. Like they're treating their houses as hotels. They're always on the go. They never sit down for a
Mm.
meal. And it's such a simple thing that I think we used to do a lot more of. And now you'd be hard pressed to find families that actually sit down and eat together routinely. And I think if we start doing that and just treating our houses as homes and using mealtime as like a special sacred time just to be together and like pray, do some deep breaths. Humming is a good way to
Hmm.
activate your vagus nerve. So is gargling, but I think doing box breathing, showing gratitude, like are such simple ways that you can do it all throughout the day. And so for me, what I try to do is if I notice my shoulders are all tight or I'm not taking deep breaths or I feel like my heart is racing a little bit, like I just try to breathe. Like it's so simple, like I just try to focus on the things that I know work. Make sure I'm hydrated, make sure I have plenty of minerals, plenty of magnesium in my system, just to kind of balance that loss that happens with high cortisol. And just try to do the simple things. And I think that's, again, we don't have to go like to a wellness retreat to learn how to do this stuff. Like, a lot of it is intuitive for our bodies. Like if you ever watch a kid breathe, especially a newborn, like they diaphragmatic breathe all the time. Like they use their diaphragm to kind of do that. You watch an adult, like they don't even know how to do that anymore. And so teaching your body how to diaphragmatic breathe is so important, but we know how to do it from birth. And I think it's something that's God's given us, but if we don't Sabbath and rest and like have moments of that, it becomes a forgotten skill.
Yeah, good tips. Pray before meals and breathe. Okay. So,
Yeah. Super simple.
before we talk about foundational just like nutrition and supplements, I actually want to go back because I do want to ask like back to birth control. So, how can we handle situations where maybe a woman's circumstances like require, I shouldn't say require, but there are, I don't prescribe it very often, but occasionally I will prescribe it. Like sometimes there are circumstances where we've tried maybe the natural approach, it's not working, they do need birth control. So if it's the most practical choice, which just sounds silly for me to say, but what I'm getting
Sure.
at is how can we make it safer for them? So like what nutrients should women be taking? You mentioned, birth control depletes B vitamins, affects methylation, disrupts our microbiome. So for
Yeah.
women who are on it, who are listening to this podcast, and maybe they want to work to get to the root cause and get off birth control, but until then, what advice do you have for them? How can we make birth controls like safer?
And this is just for somebody that's doing it for preventing symptoms or trying to manage symptoms, correct?
Sure, yes. We'll just say that.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I mean, so it kind of gets back to what I was saying earlier with so for me, I always want to identify what their day looks like. And so a lot of women I talk to, I'll just kind of give it a typical scenario of what I see. So, they'll wake up, they'll kind of skip breakfast, they'll have some coffee with some cream, maybe some sugar in it or some kind of sweetener. They'll
Yeah.
Yeah, right away. Like, nope, not gonna work. I call it a hormonal bomb, but like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
so many women do that, and then they think, well, I'm fasting, which is not true, but like they think they're fasting, which they're actually breaking their fast with their coffee, and then a lot of them. It's just kind of wild to me how much caffeine a lot of these women are intaking on a daily basis, and so
Which
they're
is
like, well, I'm
further
only having
depleting B vitamins, which they need for methylation. Yeah.
right and
Yeah.
spiking blood sugar and
Mhm.
all this stuff, and so they'll do that, and then I think they'll have like a light lunch. They'll have like a salad, very little protein, but they'll have like ranch dressing or some kind of salad dressing on there that's like full of seed oils and who knows what else
Mhm.
in there. And, and they're trying to like eat healthy by eating a salad. But they're not getting any protein, not getting really any quality fats. And they're kind of just in the state of like blood sugar instability is what I kind of call it. So it's like you spike your blood sugar when you're waking up. Your cortisol is already high because it's supposed to be, at least it should be when you first wake up, and then you're prolonging that spike and then you're kind of just in the state of survival, fight or flight response until you have your quote unquote lunch. And the next thing you know, like you're not getting enough healthy fats, you're not getting sufficient protein, so you're hangry, you're hungry, so you're gonna be more likely to eat snacks and graze throughout the day, which is tough on your gut, right? And so you're kind of grazing, you're not getting any digestive rest. And then you make it to 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you're exhausted. So you get like a stimulant, maybe you get more caffeine, maybe you get some sugar, maybe you get some chocolate, something like that, just to kind of push you through. And then you get to the end of the day and you have your big meal. You eat too much because you're hungry, and then you disrupt your sleep. You're eating too close to bedtime. Your cortisol is going to spike at before bed, and your melatonin is maybe not sufficient enough because you have disrupted gut health. Your serotonin output's too low. And next thing you know, like your sleep's disrupted, you wake up tired, and you do the same thing over and over again. So we have to break that cycle. Like we have to start to correct circadian rhythm, and we have to start ensuring that they're getting sufficient B vitamins, omega 3s, vitamin D with K2, obviously, magnesium. Like those are like the four core ones that I want most people to be on their whole life. Like it's just because like those are things that we don't really get from our food anymore. That we should be like supplements should be supplementing what you would get from a diet,
Mm-hmm.
right? There are other compounds that we'll use that are specific to helping certain forms of detoxification or like a little bit more specific. But for most people, a good quality omega-3, I usually say at least 1,600 milligrams per day. You want about 600 milligrams of EPA and DHA per dose. And you want to make sure that you're taking that with food, same with the fat soluble vitamin D. And again, vitamin D3 and K2, I like most of my clients to be around 5,000 IUs, depending on what their levels are, and also depending on the time of the year, if it's winter or summer. But for a lot of them, that's kind of like a good range just to be in. But you got to check, just make sure. And then same with B vitamins. I like a B complex, unless they have issues with methylated vitamins. I like a methylated B complex
Mm-hmm.
for most of my clients. And then magnesium. Like if you take, I like magnesium glycinate. There's many forms of magnesium. You can use magnesium complexes if you have constipation. Magnesium citrate's pretty good. Malate can be pretty good. Like there's different forms of it. I really just think glycinate's a good option that doesn't disrupt your stomach, and you can take it on an empty stomach, and it helps with
Sure.
sleep. It helps with blood sugar regulation, energy. So it's a good combo. But those are like the four essential ones. And then beyond that, it just kind of depends on what I'm seeing with the client and the kind of what issues they're having specifically. And that's where it gets really nuanced for me and them. But those are the core places I like to start.
So your answer is for patients who are taking birth control, we need to correct their diet as far as from a nutritional standpoint, not do what you just described.
Right.
And
Yeah.
then
Do all the opposite of that.
and then
Yeah.
and then also take those supplements. So fish oil, magnesium, vitamin D with K2 and Bs.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
again, that's like just for like a general person listening
Yes,
to this,
yes.
like
Yeah.
you're probably not going to go wrong with those. Again, always consult your provider, but like it's hard to go wrong with those foundational things. Like that's what I think humans need, especially
Mm-hmm.
women in this day and age. But then again, if you can correct your day-to-day routine and your rhythm, and I always tell my clients, eat about 80% of your clients before 2 o'clock is kind of my quote unquote rule for them, just because it forces them in a way to prioritize their breakfast and their lunch so
Mm-hmm.
that they're not grazing throughout the day. And it also energizes you. Like that's what food is supposed to
Mm-hmm.
do, is energize you for the day, right? And not eating it all at night. And then their sleep is better, their digestive symptoms are better. But if you have constipation, if you have loose stools all the time, like we got to get that stuff corrected, and we have to
Mm-hmm.
figure out what foods trigger you from an inflammatory standpoint and from a food standpoint. And so I'll walk them through like a diagnostic diet is what I call it, but really it's just an elimination diet method of kind of figuring
Yeah.
out what triggers them, and understanding how their immune system has memory to it. And if you don't follow the right protocol for the right amount of time, like you can start to see conflicting symptoms, and that makes it difficult to know if you're on the right track or not. So I walk them through a diagnostic process with that, so they can figure out what triggers them specifically. And while we're doing that, we get them on those basic supplements. We correct their circadian rhythm, make sure their sleep is good, make sure they have no
Mm-hmm.
constipation, and then we walk them through about a 4-month process of detoxification that gets pretty involved depending on what they need. And then after that's all said and done, we then figure out a long-term plan for them, do a Dutch test or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
and
And
kind of
then
go from
maybe
there.
they're
So
feeling so good they don't need the birth control.
oh no, yeah. I mean, most of my
Yeah.
clients get off it within the first 4 weeks,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
I
yeah.
always tell them, like, if you're on birth control and you're here with your interventions, like you have to do one of these, right? You have to kind of progressively be prepared to get off it, because if you just get off it without preparing first, like you
Yeah.
probably won't do well, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
if you can gradually do that and kind of improve your health before you get off it, then you can get off it successfully. And that's how it is with, in my opinion, most medications, especially
Yep.
thyroid medications.
Yep.
That's what we usually try to do
Yeah.
with our
Everything
doctor.
we're talking about today doesn't just apply to birth control.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And you'd be amazed. Like I had just somebody yesterday, I had one lady say, she was doing, can't remember how much insulin she was doing, but she basically was doing insulin every day. And then now she's doing it once like every 8 days. And she has an automatic pump because her blood sugar has just gone, it went from like being in the 400s to now being 80 at rest. And so she's doing great.
Whoa,
And
that's
then I had another,
phenomenal. Yeah.
yeah,
Reduction in need. Yeah.
yeah. That was in 5 weeks. And then I had another lady. She was on thyroid medications, and her TSH was at like 7 or something like that. And then she stopped taking her medication. She didn't tell me this, by the way. She just stopped taking them. But she got her blood work checked like a month, maybe 2 months later, and her TSH was like 2. And she didn't tell her
Yeah.
doctor like, hey, this is I didn't take the medication. And her doctor's like, oh, wow, like, congratulations. Like, the medication must be working. She's like, no, actually, I didn't take the medications. I've been following this plan. And the doctor's like, oh, well, that's cool. And didn't like ask at all what she did.
Oh,
She was
yeah.
just like, oh, that's cool. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's like your body wants to heal, and it just,
Mhm.
you got to work smartly with this stuff. You can't just do it on a whim. Like, you got to make sure you're doing the right things. But I always tell people that the body wants to heal. It's very good at healing. It's just, you got to give it what it needs to do that.
Mhm. I mentioned to you, I think before we started recording, I don't remember if I mentioned it on the show or not, but my second book, Your Fertility Blueprint, is going to launch in November of this year, which I'm
Awesome.
super excited about. And so, on the flip side of contraception, right, just to talk about reproductive health in general,
Mm,
I did want to ask, you've already answered a lot of these questions, but I was going to ask, in your opinion, kind of what role does nutrition play in reproductive health? So, I don't know if you
mhm.
want to maybe answer that. You can repeat some of the things you've already said.
Yeah.
But, if you have a client come to you who, they're not wanting birth control, they're trying to conceive, what are some of
Hmm.
your tips, even with supplements and diet and whatnot?
Yeah, this is one of my favorites. I mean, this is my whole the reason we work with women is that we feel like it's the gateway into the family. It's like
Yeah,
if
yeah,
you help mom, you help the father, you help the husband, you help the
yeah,
kids.
yeah, well said.
And also we've had, I mean, I don't know how many women we've helped that came in that were unable to conceive, and they conceived shortly thereafter. And again, I don't know, like I like to use frameworks for people just to kind of explain
Hmm.
why things are maybe
Yeah.
not happening. And so I always try to make it so obvious to my clients, just like, okay, like, look at your life and look at like what you're doing and not doing. And for most of them, they're encouraging this fight or flight response all the time, right? And I've already mentioned that several times. So what does that actually mean? Well, it means that you're going to take, you know, cholesterol, and you're going to convert it into progesterone, and then take that and maybe convert it into or cortisol or progesterone, and kind of go down this whole cascade of this hormonal conversion, right? And so again, if your body is like prioritizing your survival first,
Hmm.
and you're maybe you're low in cholesterol because you're not eating healthy fats, and maybe you don't have sufficient omega-3 acids to convert into pregnenolone and then into progesterone and all this whole cascade of events. Like, what you're going to start seeing is that if you don't have the building blocks to start with, like, you're just running on empty to begin with, right? And so you're going to take whatever's left, and you're just going to dump it into survival hormones, which is cortisol typically. And so for a lot of my clients, I try to show them like what they're actually doing to push themselves in the wrong direction, so that they kind of have some awareness, is like, oh, like, over exercising is actually maybe not a good idea, especially if I'm under
Yeah.
eating and
Yeah,
not
yeah.
getting enough
It's,
sleep.
it's
So
working
it's like,
against my ability to get pregnant. Yeah, yeah.
right. And so, and like, and so like, they're told like, it's a calorie in, calorie out thing. If you want to lose weight, you got to like reduce calories by 3,500 calories to lose a pound. And it's like, well, that is technically true if all things are considered equal. But like, there's a lot of other variables that then create this adaptive thermogenesis state where your body's going to slow down metabolism or speed it up depending on what you need. And so for a lot of these clients, it's like, we got to first identify, where are you doing too much? Like, are you like, sometimes less is more with this stuff. And if you're doing too much, cardiovascular endurance running, and then you're not eating enough fat and protein, and then you're not sleeping, cortisol is going to be prioritized. Progesterone will not be prioritized. So if you want to make a baby, you got to have nice, sufficient levels of consistent progesterone on a consistent basis, especially around ovulation, and then especially through the duration of your pregnancy if you want to sustain it. And so for a lot of clients, we want to focus on that just so they can see like what they can do on a day-to-day basis. And then we want to focus on, like I said before, the omega-3 fatty acids,
Hmm.
sufficient fats in their diet, making sure that they are getting sufficient sleep, that their magnesium levels are sufficiently supplied, that if they do have these forms of oxidative stress in their system where they're producing these free radicals and not detoxing them out, like, you got to get rid of that stuff so their body is kind of free and clear of it for the most part,
Hmm.
so it doesn't feel so burdened by it. And if you do that, you start seeing these hormonal pathways work the way they're supposed to, where progesterone gets prioritized.
Improve. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, estrogen is balanced, like between your three estrogens, you're detoxing it out. Your testosterone is not too high or too low, like you kind of get that optimized. But all these things require cofactors for conversion. And if you're low in zinc, if you're high in inflammation, if you're low in omega 3s, B vitamins, like you're just not going to convert these things very well. And you're going to only prioritize usually cortisol for the most part, or imbalanced estrogen with testosterone and things like that.
Yeah.
So that's, again, I don't want to oversimplify it, but that's kind of how I communicate it with my clients, at least.
Sure. Then I would echo also just getting them on an anti-inflammatory diet helps make the uterine environment more hospitable to an
Oh,
embryo implanting. So yes, we need to get the inflammation down. And then I would add to some of those supplements. So to nurture the mitochondria specifically of the egg for good egg quality and sperm quality to make a high quality embryo, we need antioxidants, which also help
mm,
with detoxification and some of the things you said. So CoQ10, alpha lipoic acid, we can
yeah.
test patients to see what they're low in, to see what they need more of. But yeah, we got to build a healthy foundation first, get the inflammation down, and then we can add some of the antioxidants too.
Yeah,
So,
and I think, and for people who don't know, like, if they're wondering, like, they hear antioxidants, and like I know what that term is, kind of, but like what that really means is glutathione, right? Like that's our major antioxidant. And so I think for somebody who's listening to this who wants to see, like, do I produce antioxidants? You can go check homocysteine, which is basically is created if you don't default into this other pathway of creating glutathione. Like, you start to create higher levels of homocysteine, and again, that gets back to methylation, which I was referring to
mhm.
before, which is this detox thing. So you can check homocysteine in your lab work. I mean, I'm not sure, most doctors probably won't check it, but you can check it. You can order it
Yeah,
yourself
yeah.
sometimes and see that. But you'll be able to tell, hey, my homocystine's high. That means I'm probably not creating a lot
Mhm.
of antioxidants here, which means my inflammation's probably high, which means I probably need to look at my B vitamins and other things to kind of get this
Yeah.
level up. But absolutely, I mean,
Sure.
that's such
That's the
important stuff.
easiest, probably the easiest lab to check. But we can
Right.
check all your other antioxidant levels too, including glutathione.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. You can check it directly. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And you can take it directly too. It's just,
Yeah,
it's
of
hard to
course. Yeah.
absorb. Yeah. Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
But anyway.
I have to ask really quick. I want to talk about your faith and how you incorporate that into your practice, but really quick, I want to ask your thoughts on nicotine, which has nothing to do with birth control or
Yeah.
but I just want to ask really quick your thoughts on that, and then I want to talk about your faith a little bit. So, nicotine, pro or con? Like what are your thoughts on it?
It's very, so I was just having this conversation with another client. She has long COVID. She had the vaccine. She's had seizures since she's had the vaccine that are
Oh,
directly correlated. It's kind of wild. But for her, she's having more of an autoimmune response, of course, because of what spike protein's likely doing in her system. And so for her, I brought up nicotine as like a something to think about for down the road, just because I wouldn't want to endorse nicotine for most women that are in a state of hormonal imbalance, because it's going to drive more of this cortisol response, and kind of push more of this like adrenaline response, which I don't think is wise for a lot of women unless you have a pretty good tolerance for that and you feel like you're
hmm
pretty well balanced. Um, because if you do tolerate it, even if it is like if you do like a nicotine patch, is what I always reference.
hmm
I'm not
Yeah,
endorsing
yeah,
smoking, obviously,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
but like a nicotine patch is, they're a pretty clean delivery mechanism for the most part. Nicotine is not, I think, what we're told. I think a lot of the research about it is not isolating nicotine by itself, and it's not looking at slow release forms of nicotine. It's looking at like a cigarette, things like that, or even the Zen type stuff. If you look at the slow release stuff, it's, in my opinion, if you're okay with caffeine, you should be okay with nicotine. I think they have similar effects, and the half life of how long they last is fairly similar, within an hour to 2 hours, as far as like when it's released, and when you start to notice that the half life of nicotine is shorter than caffeine, I believe. The half life of caffeine is like 7 to 10 hours, so it can linger in your system, disrupt your sleep. Nicotine, I think it's a little bit shorter, and for some people, they may not have an issue with it. But for a lot of my clients, I don't recommend it right off the bat because I don't think it's the right call. But the
hmm
benefit of it is pretty profound in terms of if you have Parkinson's, or if you have even some Alzheimer's issues. And then with COVID, the reason I started looking into it was because of this doctor that put nicotine patches on his smoking COVID patients during COVID. He saw that they
hmm
weren't dying from COVID. Like, none of them were dying from
Yeah, yeah,
COVID. Other
yeah.
people were. And that was so interesting to me. And so you start seeing that it blocks the receptor site for the COVID spike virus or the protein. And that's where it kind of becomes like a specific benefit for people that have long COVID. But I've used it occasionally for the last probably 6 months, and I haven't been sick. And my
Personally,
son,
you've used it personally, a patch?
personally, yeah,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
always like to test things to see before I
Me
too,
too, before,
recommending it.
yeah.
Yeah. So I've tested a lot of things. You should see my pantry. But the interesting thing I noticed was that after I got COVID back in 2020 in the first version of it, and I lost my sense of smell for a while. Like it was kind of subdued for a long time, and I noticed after doing the nicotine that my sense of smell came back. Like, and that's where I was kind of like, this is very
This is
interesting.
doing something. Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
So I think there is some protective benefits there, but I wouldn't just blanket endorse it for everybody,
For
especially
everybody. Yeah.
women.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. I like how you framed your response to that. Yeah. I like that.
yeah,
Okay.
no.
I love that you are outspoken about your faith, as am I. And I just want to ask kind of how you integrate that into your practice with your
Mm.
clients. And then I just want to ask, like, as a Christian, do you feel like we really need to honor God by what we put inside this God-given body?
Yeah, I love how you framed it, God given body. Like that's how I've been thinking about it more recently. It's just like this isn't even mine. This isn't
Hmm.
even my body. Like this is something I've been given to steward. And so it's just like if I borrowed somebody's car, like I'm not going to return it empty on gas and like dirty. Like I'm going to clean it up and
Hmm.
bring it back nicely because it's not mine. And I think as Christians we have this difficult issue with balancing you know, thinking everything's meaningless and worthless and not even caring about our bodies and like saying like, well, it's all going to burn one day anyway. And then looking at the other side of this gutter is like, well, I also don't want to idolize my body and like
Right.
make it an idol. So we have to find this balance in between. And as far as my clients, I always use this comparison that like there's things that we're ignorant to that we don't know that can harm us that we have to figure out. Like, so we have to figure out like where we're ignorant and do more research and learn more about ourselves and what the body is trying to communicate. And then there are things that we have like iniquities towards where it's like, I know they're not good, but I'm gonna do them anyway. And that's where there's like, I think either one of those camps can really ruin you. And so if you can live intentionally, understanding that this isn't your body, it's been given to you to steward,
Hmm.
and it's a useful tool that will help you to be the hands and feet of your creator, and also just makes your experience on life that much better if you do feel better. Like if you feel bad, I'm not sure about you, I had 10 years or so where I was chronically in pain and had fatigue, and I don't know about you, but like it's terrible. Like it's not a good place to be. And when you feel well, you're just so much more efficient with your mind and how you think and how you operate and
Hmm.
how you can help other people. And so I think sickness and disease like creates this like indwelling focus about like me and my problems, and it just creates this like victim mentality, rightfully so, because it's hard. But like when you get beyond that and you get outside of that, you can start looking at other people and how you can impact them and not just yourself. And I think that's one of the main points of being healthy is that number one, we have all the tools given to us through the power of the Holy Spirit to be obedient, self-disciplined, be slow to anger, be filled with joy and gratitude. And that's what it takes to be healthy. Like it's not easy
Hmm.
to be
Hmm.
intentional. And if you are a Christian, in my opinion, you have a superpower that like can make you like we could be some of the healthiest people in the world, not because we make it an idol, but because we have the Holy Spirit. And so
Hmm.
I don't know why we wouldn't want to be healthy as Christians. I'm disappointed that more pastors don't talk about it.
Me
Um,
too. Me
I
too. Like, I'm sorry that's a
no, yeah,
recent
go ahead.
like passion of mine, or I don't know, maybe I don't know passion, but like conviction. Like, as a
Yeah,
healthcare provider, obviously, like you don't want to go see a super obese doctor for weight loss. Like that doesn't make sense. Like if someone's going to come to see me for health advice, I need to be practicing what I
right,
preach.
right.
But I do feel like I feel like the church has such an opportunity to speak health, and I feel like they're just missing out on that just lately. I just feel like that. I
No,
just
I
wish there
100%
was
agree.
more there, but I mean that's another whole podcast. But yeah, but I feel like but I'm not responsible for that. I'm responsible for myself and like setting
Yeah,
an example. Yeah.
but I've thought about that a lot too, and I've
Yeah.
talked to some past pastors about it, and the response I get is like, well, we don't want to be democratic in kind of how we talk about certain things. Like we have to talk about only like what the Bible talks about. I'm like, well, the Bible actually talks a lot about health. Like
Uh-huh.
it's
Uh-huh.
actually in
Yeah.
there quite a bit. So it's not like you're assigning. Like unfortunately, health has become politicized, and so now the church is even less prone to want to talk about it because they don't
We
want to
don't
be
want to offend
politically
anyone.
involved.
And yeah, yeah,
I'm just
yeah.
like, it's not about that. Like, and RFK said, Republican or Democrat, kids, it doesn't matter. Like they should all be healthy. Like
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't isolate those kids. And so I just think, yeah, if the pastors aren't going to do it, I'm at a point now where I'm just going to start. I got to find a way, and maybe we can do it together in some capacity. But I want to have like some kind of event or events where it becomes like a church service. And I'm not a pastor, so I would love to get
Right, right.
pastors that could do that or want to do that and talk on it, but make it about what does a healthy family look like? Like, what are the practical tips on actually how to do it? and then what is the spiritual implication of why it's important, and just get people together. And I think we need to have more Christians need to have more conferences like all these other, like holistic providers do, and they do all this weird spiritual stuff anyway, but it's not biblical. And in my mind, I'm like,
Mhm.
us Christian healthcare providers need to be countering that
Mm,
as much as we possibly can, because we are responsible for sharing the
mhm.
gospel, and what a great way to do it through helping somebody with their health. And so if anyone who's listening to this like has ideas, please contact me
Yeah,
or Dr. Stephanie. Like I think it's something that really needs to be done in this day and age.
I agree. 100%.
Yeah.
Good goal. Good goal to have. Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I could just keep asking you questions, but we've already talked for an hour. So,
Yeah, it was
as
fun.
we wrap up the show, tell me, where can listeners find you?
They can go on my Instagram or social. You can Google my name probably, but if you go dr.austin.lake, you can find my Instagram. If you type in holy, it's WHOLLY, that kind of holy dot health. You'll find my website, and you can, if you want to schedule a call or anything like that. And then I think we're also going to put like an ebook with a big discount on it in the link down below, so you guys can read through that ebook if you want. But it's just a simple guide. It's nothing fancy, so don't get your hopes up.
It sounds like, don't discredit yourself. Yeah, don't
No,
minimize what
I'm
they're
just
going to
being,
get. No.
yeah, just my
So it
opinion.
sounds like this ebook, I have not read it, but it sounds like it's going to just kind of summarize everything we talked about today. So some excellent tips in there. So thank you for that. We'll definitely put that link in there for the
Yeah,
listeners.
of course.
I don't know that I prepped you for this, but I ask all my listeners their top longevity tip. So final question, what is your
Hmm.
top longevity tip?
Oh boy. I think, I mean, it's multifaceted. I think it probably involves more of like a mindset, more than anything else, because I think through the right framework, the right mindset, it starts to kind of provide, the pathway to experiencing longevity. So I think the mindset that I would want to communicate is that, believing that you're a healthy person who's trying to get healthier. I think it's really important to like tell yourself, like, I am a healthy person. Like if I wasn't, I wouldn't be here right now. Like I wouldn't be breathing. So like you're healthy enough to that you're still here. But your body is designed to heal, right? And so I think it's really important that we remind ourselves that and look at examples of that, because the world will tell you that it doesn't, and that it's broken, and that you're
Hmm.
destined for failure. But the reality is, the body is by God's design so capable of these little miracles each and every day that we kind of just ignore. But the body is designed to heal. So remind yourself that you are capable of healing. You are a healthy person who's getting healthier, and you're not broken. Like that's what I would tell people.
That's great. Wonderful. Love it. All right, Dr. Lake, thank you so much for coming on the show today and sharing
Yeah.
both your personal faith, a little bit about your family, and your functional medicine approach to patients, which is very similar to mine. So this is great. Good
Yeah, it's
conversation.
awesome. I
Thanks
loved
for
it. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
thanks for coming on the show.
Of course.